When a decorated soldier faces an unexpected confrontation outside his own home, the community's hidden tensions are exposed, and a chain of events unfolds that no one could have predicted. What begins as a moment of fear becomes a journey that shocks everyone, challenging beliefs and igniting a movement for change. Marcus walked slowly down his quiet street, a duffel bag hanging heavily from his shoulder. He had just returned from months overseas, and every step felt like a reminder of the peace he'd missed. The sun was low, casting a warm orange glow over his neighborhood, giving everything a soft, comforting hue. Marcus's mind was on simple things, seeing his wife, Rachel, and hugging his young daughter, Layla, who'd grown so much since he'd last seen her. He smiled as he saw her little figure come running from the porch, her arms wide open, squealing with delight. He dropped his bag and scooped her up, her laughter filling the air as she wrapped her arms around his neck. He glanced over her shoulder and saw a few neighbors watching from their doorsteps, smiling and waving. Mrs. Johnson, the elderly woman from across the street, gave him a small nod. Her face softened with pride. Marcus waved back, grateful for the warm welcome, a small relief in the quiet stability of home. As he set Layla down, Rachel stepped out onto the porch, her face lighting up as she spotted him. They exchanged a look that held months of missed moments, conversations, and simple, quiet love. He pulled her into a hug, the familiar feel of her in his arms reminding him he was finally home. They held each other in silence, letting the moment sink in, savoring the sense of peace that only being with family could bring. Just as they were about to head inside, Marcus noticed a car parked across the street, its engine quietly idling. He didn't think much of it at first until he saw the officer inside, the same officer who often patrolled the area. Marcus was used to seeing him around, but something about the way the officer stared at him, unblinking and tense, made him uneasy. He tried to brush it off, but there was something unsettling in the officer's eyes, a hard, piercing gaze that felt intrusive. The officer, Jake Adams, shifted slightly in his seat, his face showing a hint of suspicion. He seemed to hesitate, as if debating whether to stay or leave. Finally, he opened the car door and stepped out, his heavy boots hitting the pavement with purpose. Marcus felt the tension rise as Jake walked toward him, each step measured, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. Layla tightened her grip on her father's hand, sensing the change in mood. Rachel glanced nervously at Marcus, a silent question in her eyes. "Do you live here?" Jake's voice was sharp, a note of accusation lurking beneath the simple question. Marcus paused, thrown off by the tone. He answered calmly, "Yes, officer. Just got back today." Jake's gaze traveled over Marcus, sizing him up, his eyes narrowing. The warm glow of the evening seemed to cool in that moment, a chill settling over the scene as Jake took another step closer. Marcus could feel the weight of the officer's scrutiny, as if he were under a harsh spotlight with no room for error. His smile faded as he realized this was no friendly welcome. "What's in the bag?" Jake's voice was lower now, edged with suspicion. Marcus shifted slightly, feeling the weight of the duffel bag on his shoulder and the officer's gaze on him. He answered calmly, keeping his voice steady. "Just some personal items, officer. Clothes and things from my deployment." Jake didn't seem satisfied. He squinted, a subtle but unmistakable look of distrust in his eyes, as if Marcus's answer hadn't quite convinced him. Marcus could sense that this was about more than a routine question. Layla clung to his side, her eyes darting between her father and the officer, her small face twisted in confusion and worry. Jake took another step forward, and the slight tension in his body became more visible. His hand hovered a little too close to his holster, the casual gesture layered with an unspoken threat. He looked around, noting the handful of neighbors watching quietly, then leaned in a bit closer to Marcus. "Do you have ID on you?" he asked, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He hadn't expected this, especially not after just returning home. He didn't want to cause a scene, especially not in front of his daughter, but he wasn't about to be intimidated either. He kept his voice calm but firm as he answered, It's inside the house. I'd be happy to get it for you if that would help. Jake's lips pressed into a thin line, as though he didn't quite believe Marcus. He shifted his weight, his fingers twitching by his side. "I'd rather you stay right here," he replied, his eyes fixed on Marcus, a subtle challenge in his tone. Rachel, who had been silent until now, took a small step forward, her face filled with a mixture of worry and resolve. "Officer, we've lived here for years," she said, trying to inject some reason into the situation. "Marcus has just come back from serving overseas. He's a soldier." Jake's eyes flicked to her briefly, his expression unchanging. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am," he replied curtly, before shifting his gaze back to Marcus. The casual warmth of the neighborhood had faded entirely, replaced by a growing unease that hung thick in the air. Marcus could feel the tension growing, his every instinct telling him to keep calm, keep steady. He could sense Layla's grip tightening on his hand, her small fingers squeezing with a silent question. Why was this happening? He reached down, giving her hand a gentle squeeze in return, hoping to reassure her, even as he felt his own pulse quicken. Jake's gaze remained fixed on him, his posture unyielding, almost daring Marcus to challenge him. Marcus resisted the urge to protest further, knowing that any sign of impatience could be twisted in ways he couldn't control. He took a steadying breath, meeting the officer's gaze directly. "Look, I'm just here with my family trying to get home," he said in a measured tone. "There's nothing suspicious going on here. I'm a member of this community, just like anyone else." Jake's jaw tightened, his hand lingering near his holster, and for a brief second, Marcus thought he saw a flicker of uncertainty in the officer's eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. Jake leaned in, his voice dropping to a low murmur that only Marcus could hear. "Maybe where you come from, people just walk around with bags without questions, but not here." Marcus's chest tightened, a spark of anger igniting inside him. He forced himself to stay calm, to remember that this was about more than just him. The eyes of his family, his neighbors, everyone was on him, and he knew how easily this could turn against him if he let his emotions slip. "I don't want trouble," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "I just want to go inside with my family, that's all." But Jake's face was set, his body language broadcasting a refusal to let go of his suspicion. A few neighbors began whispering, glancing nervously between Marcus and the officer. Mrs. Johnson from across the street clutched her phone tightly, her brows furrowed with concern. One younger neighbor took out his phone, recording quietly from behind a parked car. The tension was palpable now, everyone sensing that this was about more than just an ID check. Marcus could feel the weight of their gazes, the silent support from his community as they watched, helpless but unwilling to turn away. Jake's eyes flicked briefly to the small crowd that had gathered, a shadow of irritation crossing his face. Marcus saw it too, noticing how the officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that every move he made was now being watched. Jake's posture stiffened, and he turned his attention back to Marcus, his tone colder than before. "Step back from the bag," Jake ordered, his voice louder now, aimed to reassert his authority. "I'll check it myself." Marcus felt a surge of frustration. He'd been patient, calm, respectful, but now this. He glanced down at the bag, which held nothing more than folded clothes, a few books, and souvenirs from his time overseas, reminders of the months he'd spent away from his family. This was his life in that bag, and now it felt like it was being reduced to something suspicious, something he had to prove was innocent. "Officer, please," Marcus said, his tone strained but controlled. "It's just my personal belongings. You don't need to do this." Jake's gaze hardened, a steely glint in his eyes. "I don't take orders from you," he snapped, his voice thick with a mixture of disdain and defensiveness. He took a step forward, one hand on his hip, fingers resting too close to his holster. "Step back. Now." Rachel's face paled, and she reached out, touching Marcus's arm in silent plea. "Marcus," she whispered, the fear in her voice unmistakable. But before Marcus could respond, The voice of another neighbor broke the tense silence. "This isn't right, officer," a man called out. It was Mr. Green, an older man who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades. "He's just come home. We all know Marcus. He doesn't deserve this." Jake turned sharply, his glare silencing the murmurs. "This is police business," he snapped, his voice growing harsher. "I don't need anyone interfering." The crowd stirred, the unease thickening as more neighbors stepped forward, their faces showing a mix of worry and anger. Marcus could feel their support like a quiet current around him, the community that knew him standing up, refusing to let this moment pass unchallenged. But Jake's face remained rigid, his expression unmoved by the crowd's growing disapproval. And then, just as the tension seemed about to break, Marcus heard the low hum of a car pulling up nearby. He turned, and his heart lifted as he saw the familiar face of Captain Davis, his former commanding officer, stepping out of the vehicle. Dressed in civilian clothes, Captain Davis's presence seemed to calm the air, his steady gaze sweeping over the scene, taking in the crowd, the officer, and Marcus in a single glance. "Is there a problem here?" Captain Davis asked, his voice firm but calm, his gaze fixed squarely on Jake. Jake's face shifted subtly, a flicker of surprise crossing his expression as he took in Captain Davis's presence. For a moment he seemed unsure, caught off guard by the commanding figure of the man who clearly carried authority, even in civilian clothes. The tension in the air shifted, like a storm teetering on the edge of breaking. Captain Davis walked closer, his expression calm but resolute, eyes focused intently on Jake. "Officer, is there a reason you're questioning one of my soldiers here?" His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that couldn't be ignored. He glanced at Marcus, a slight nod of recognition, his silent way of reassuring him. Jake's jaw tightened, visibly wrestling with the situation. The crowd, sensing the shift in power, watched with bated breath, their whispers quieting as they waited to see how this confrontation would unfold. Jake's gaze flicked to Marcus, then back to Captain Davis. His posture grew defensive, as though unwilling to back down but increasingly aware of how precarious his position had become. "I was just following protocol," Jake said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier bite. The situation seemed suspicious. Captain Davis's eyes narrowed, a cool intensity settling into his gaze. "Suspicious," he repeated, his tone cutting through the officer's weak justification. "This man just returned from serving his country. He lives here. This is his home." Jake opened his mouth, as if to argue, but the words seemed to falter. For the first time, there was a slight flush of discomfort on his face, as he realized how hollow his reasoning sounded in the presence of both Captain Davis and the watchful crowd. "Do you often stop residents on their own property without probable cause, officer?" Captain Davis's words were clear and unyielding, and his gaze held Jake's with a firm steadiness that brooked no argument. "Or is there something more here that I'm not seeing?" Jake's eyes darted to the neighbors, who were watching with expressions of quiet satisfaction and righteous anger. He shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his authority slipping, as if it were slipping through his fingers. The crowd's gaze felt heavier, their quiet strength pressing against him, their presence a clear reminder that they were witnesses to his actions. Finally, Jake took a step back, the confidence draining from his posture. I was just doing my job," he muttered, though the defensiveness had faded from his voice, replaced by a hint of something else, something like regret, or perhaps shame. Captain Davis didn't respond immediately. He stood tall, his presence radiating a calm strength as he looked from Jake to Marcus and then back to Jake. "Your job," he said slowly, his voice filled with purpose, "is to protect and serve, not to harass innocent people who are simply trying to live their lives. This man is a hero to this country. Show some respect." The words hung in the air, each syllable landing like a quiet rebuke. Jake looked down, his expression finally breaking, a flash of uncertainty and self-awareness flickering across his face as he took in the gravity of what Captain Davis had said. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him as he watched Jake's rigid stance waver, the officer's shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of Captain Davis's words. The crowd was silent, every face turned toward them, waiting to see what would happen next. For a moment, Marcus locked eyes with Jake, a silent exchange passing between them, one that held anger, frustration, and something else neither of them could name. Jake swallowed hard, glancing at the faces around him, all witnessing the unraveling of his authority. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, he took a step back as though retreating from the invisible pressure of his own mistakes. His gaze dropped, and he mumbled almost to himself, I didn't realize." Captain Davis raised an eyebrow, his expression firm but not without a hint of understanding. "Realize or not, officer, you need to understand what your actions mean in this uniform," he said, nodding toward the badge on Jake's chest. "Every interaction, every choice, it affects people. This is their home and they deserve respect." Jake shifted uncomfortably, nodding in small, reluctant acknowledgement, his fingers curling away from his holster, the defensive stance dropping from his posture. The authority he'd tried so hard to project seemed to melt away, leaving him exposed, a man suddenly realizing the consequences of his own biases. As Jake took another step back, Marcus looked around, meeting the eyes of his neighbors, their faces filled with quiet pride and solidarity. Some nodded encouragingly at him, and a few offered small, reassuring smiles. He could feel their support like a steady presence behind him, and it gave him the courage to stand a little taller. Rachel, still holding Layla's hand, stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Jake. Her voice was calm, but filled with a strength that echoed in the silent street. "All we want is to be able to come home in peace," she said, her words directed not only at Jake, but at everyone around them, a reminder of the simple dignity they sought. That shouldn't be too much to ask. Jake's face tightened, but he nodded, a small, reluctant acknowledgement that held a sliver of remorse. He looked at Marcus once more, and though he said nothing, there was a glimmer in his eyes, perhaps the faintest hint of an apology, unspoken but there. Captain Davis placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, giving it a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "Let's get you inside, soldier," he said, his tone warm, as if to remind Marcus that he was no longer in a place of conflict. He was home. Marcus nodded, feeling the tension finally ease from his body. He turned to Rachel and Layla, giving them a soft smile that held both relief and gratitude. They stepped toward the house together as the neighbors looked on, a quiet respect settling over the scene. As they walked inside, leaving the crowd and the humbled officer behind, Marcus felt something shift. This moment, though filled with tension and fear, had brought something important to light. He was home, yes, but now in the eyes of everyone around him, he was seen, truly seen, for who he was and all he had sacrificed. And that, more than anything, gave him the strength to face whatever came next. Inside the house, Marcus set down his duffel bag with a long exhale, feeling the weight of the day's tension finally slip from his shoulders. Rachel wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly, as if to assure herself that he was safe, that he was really home. Layla clung to his leg, her small arms wrapped around him as she looked up with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, why was the policeman angry at you?" she asked, her innocent voice cutting through the silence like a question none of them knew how to answer. Marcus knelt down to her level, smoothing back her curls with a gentle hand, his heart heavy. How could he explain something so complex, so painful to a child who was just beginning to see the world? "Sometimes, sweetheart," he said softly, choosing his words carefully. "People don't understand others who are different from them, and sometimes they act out of fear instead of kindness." Layla frowned, her small face scrunching up as she processed his words. "But you didn't do anything wrong, Daddy," she insisted, her voice firm as if she could protect him with her innocence alone. Marcus's heart swelled with pride and sadness at the same time. "No, I didn't," he replied, giving her a reassuring smile. "And that's why it's important to be strong and keep doing what's right, no matter what." Rachel sat down beside them, placing a comforting hand on Marcus's shoulder. Her face was still tense, traces of worry lingering in her eyes. "It shouldn't have to be like this," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've given so much, Marcus. They should know better." He nodded, understanding the frustration beneath her words, a frustration he himself had felt more times than he could count. But there was a part of him that knew he couldn't let this moment define him, or let it taint the homecoming he'd waited for all these months. A knock at the door interrupted the silence, and Rachel tensed instinctively. Marcus rose, bracing himself for another confrontation, but when he opened the door, he found Mr. Green and a few other neighbors standing there, their faces kind and apologetic. "We just wanted to check in," Mr. Green said, his voice filled with quiet sympathy. "We saw what happened and we want you to know we're here for you. We're all glad you're home, Marcus." The others nodded in agreement, their expressions warm and supportive. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything in that moment. Marcus felt a warmth spread through him, the solidarity of his community lifting some of the weight from his heart. "Thank you," he replied, his voice thick with gratitude. "It means a lot to us." Mrs. Johnson, the elderly woman who'd watched from across the street, stepped forward, holding a small American flag that had once decorated her porch. She pressed it into Marcus's hands, her eyes bright with pride. "You served us all," she said quietly, "and we won't forget that." Marcus looked down at the flag, feeling the symbolic weight of it. In that moment, he realized that despite the pain, the injustice, and the fear, he had people around him who saw him, who understood, and who stood beside him. It was enough to make him feel grounded, reminded that he wasn't alone. As his neighbors left, one by one offering encouraging words, Marcus stood by the door, watching them disappear into the warm glow of the evening. He looked down at the flag in his hand, feeling a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet resolve building within him. That night, as the house settled into a quiet calm, Marcus sat alone in the living room, the small flag resting on the table beside him. The day's events played over in his mind, each moment sharpening his awareness of the reality he had to face, not just for himself, but for his family, and for everyone else who might one day find themselves in a similar situation. The frustration and anger lingered, but beneath it all was a powerful sense of clarity. Rachel joined him, her face softened in the dim light as she settled beside him. She didn't speak at first, simply placing her hand on his, offering silent support. Marcus turned to her, feeling the comfort in her presence, the steady reminder that he wasn't in this alone. "I can't just let this go, Rachel," he finally said, his voice firm but thoughtful. "If it happened to me, it can happen to someone else. And maybe next time they won't have someone like Captain Davis to step in." Rachel nodded, her gaze steady and understanding. "I know," she replied softly. "I could see it in your eyes today. You've been through so much, and coming home shouldn't mean facing another battle." She paused, her hand tightening around his. "But maybe this is a different kind of fight, one that doesn't end on a battlefield but right here where we live." Her words sank in, resonating with a truth Marcus hadn't fully admitted to himself yet. He'd fought for his country, faced danger and uncertainty, but this was personal. This was about protecting the people he loved, the community that had embraced him, and the principles he had sworn to uphold. As they sat together, a plan began to form in Marcus's mind, clear and steady. He wasn't going to let this experience pass quietly. He would use it, turn it into something that could make a difference. He would talk to his neighbors, start conversations about what had happened, about the importance of standing up against bias and prejudice. Maybe he could hold meetings, create a space where everyone, regardless of their background, could come together and learn to see each other beyond assumptions. Rachel looked at him, seeing the resolve in his eyes. "I'll be with you every step of the way," she promised, "whatever it takes." They sat in silence for a while, absorbing the quiet strength of their shared commitment. They both knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, discomfort, and difficult conversations. But Marcus felt a newfound purpose, a way to turn his pain into action, to use his experience to protect his family and inspire his community. As he finally stood up, preparing to head to bed, he felt lighter, as though the weight of the day had transformed into something else, a mission, a calling. He knew he was stepping into uncharted territory, but with Rachel by his side and the quiet support of his neighbors, he felt ready to face whatever came next. This was his home, and he would fight for it with the same courage he had shown on the battlefield. Only this time, his fight was for peace, justice, and understanding. The following morning, Marcus awoke with a sense of purpose that felt stronger, clearer. The sun streamed through the window, casting a warm light over his home, and he could hear Layla's laughter echoing from the kitchen. Rachel was making breakfast, her gentle hum blending with the familiar sounds of a new day. It was a simple moment, but it reminded him of everything he wanted to protect: his family, his peace, and the right to feel safe in his own home. As he joined them in the kitchen, Layla ran up to him, proudly holding a crayon drawing she had made. In her colorful scrawl, she had drawn a picture of their family standing outside their house with a big heart in the sky. "See, Daddy?" she said brightly, pointing at the heart. "We're all together." Marcus smiled, feeling a surge of warmth and pride. He bent down, giving her a hug, and held her close, grateful for her innocent strength. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "And I'm going to make sure it stays that way." After breakfast, he took a deep breath and began making calls. He started with a few neighbors he knew well, explaining that he wanted to gather people together to talk about what had happened and how they could come together as a community. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. Each person he called seemed to understand the importance of this conversation, eager to contribute to the change Marcus envisioned. By late afternoon, word had spread, and a small group gathered at the local community center. Faces both familiar and new filled the room, all looking to Marcus with a sense of respect and anticipation. He stood at the front, feeling a mixture of nerves and responsibility. But when he looked out and saw Rachel and Layla sitting in the front row, his confidence steadied. He began speaking, his voice carrying both the pain of his recent experience and the hope he held for the future. "I came back home expecting peace, expecting safety," he said, looking around the room, meeting each person's eyes. "But yesterday showed me that sometimes the fight doesn't end just because you're back from a war. It continues, right here, in our neighborhoods, our communities." He spoke openly about what had happened with Officer Jake, the fear he'd felt, and the helplessness. The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in as he shared his story. "But this isn't just about me. It's about all of us, about making sure that no one feels judged, unsafe, or less than because of how they look or where they come from." The audience nodded, a few people murmuring in agreement. He could see the determination in their faces, a collective willingness to be part of the change. He then invited others to share their thoughts, their own experiences, creating a space where voices were heard, where the barriers of misunderstanding and fear could start to break down. As the conversation continued, Marcus felt a shift in the room, a sense of unity and solidarity that grew with each shared story. People began to understand one another more deeply, to see the person behind the surface. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of discomfort, but it was real, raw, and genuine. Near the end, Mr. Green spoke up, his voice filled with conviction. "This is how we build a safer community, by knowing each other, standing by each other." His words were met with nods and murmurs of agreement. When the gathering ended, people lingered, connecting with one another, offering Marcus words of support and gratitude. He knew this was only the beginning, but it was a strong beginning, a foundation they could build on, together. As he walked home with Rachel and Layla by his side, Marcus felt an undeniable sense of hope. He'd faced a moment of darkness, but in its wake he had found light, not only within himself, but within his community. And he knew, without a doubt, that together, they could create the peace and safety they all deserved. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's vision of a united, understanding community began to take shape. The first gathering had sparked a ripple effect, encouraging people to step out of their comfort zones and come together in ways they hadn't before. Every week, Marcus organized small meetings at the community center, open forums where anyone could speak, ask questions, or just listen. More and more faces showed up each time, a blend of ages, races, and backgrounds, all brought together by the shared desire to bridge gaps and strengthen bonds. One evening, Officer Jake showed up at one of the gatherings, lingering near the back, his face a mixture of hesitation and resolve. Marcus noticed him, surprised but welcoming, giving him a nod to show he was free to join the conversation. Jake stood with his hands shoved into his pockets, visibly uncomfortable, but making the effort to be there. When it was his turn to speak, Jake hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor before he raised his eyes to meet Marcus's. "I don't expect forgiveness," he began, his voice low but steady. "What I did was wrong. I let my own biases cloud my judgment, and it's something I'll carry with me for a long time." He paused, the words seeming to weigh heavily on him. "But I want to learn. I want to be better." The room was silent, every eye on Jake, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. Marcus looked at him, studying the sincerity in his face, the vulnerability he was showing by coming here. Marcus knew it took courage to admit fault, to be open to change, and he felt a quiet respect for Jake's willingness to stand before the community he had wronged. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said, his voice warm but firm. "That's the first step, acknowledging where we fall short. None of us are perfect, but we can always choose to do better." A few people in the crowd murmured in agreement, nodding as Jake took his seat. Marcus could sense that this moment held meaning not just for Jake, but for everyone in the room. It showed that change was possible, that even those who had made mistakes could be part of the solution if they were willing to grow. From that day on, Jake continued to attend the meetings, sometimes joining in the conversations, other times simply listening and learning. Over time, people in the neighborhood began to see him differently. Not as a perfect officer, but as a man willing to confront his flaws and make amends. Small gestures began to mend the rifts. Neighbors who once viewed him with distrust now offered polite greetings, tentative but genuine, and slowly, respect began to replace resentment. For Marcus, these moments were a source of quiet pride and hope. He had turned a painful experience into a path forward, one that brought healing not only for himself but for his entire community. Each week, as more people joined and more walls came down, Marcus felt his purpose deepening, the impact of his actions rippling further than he had ever imagined. As the months passed, the neighborhood transformed. The community became stronger, more connected, with people standing up for each other in ways that hadn't been seen before. And as Marcus walked down his street, the same street where everything had changed, he felt a deep sense of peace, knowing he had found a way to protect and uplift his family, his friends, and everyone who called this place home. In the end, Marcus's journey had taken him from conflict to connection, from fear to understanding, leaving behind a legacy of unity, resilience, and hope for the future. 1 year later, the neighborhood was almost unrecognizable, not in appearance, but in spirit. The sense of unity that Marcus had helped cultivate had blossomed into a vibrant, supportive community. Neighbors who had once been strangers now shared meals, organized events, and looked out for each other in ways they hadn't before. It was as if the boundaries that had once divided them had faded, replaced by a collective sense of belonging. Marcus continued to play a central role, not as a leader with authority, but as a quiet force who brought people together. He led workshops on diversity and inclusion, inviting speakers from different walks of life to share their stories and perspectives. These events attracted a mix of residents and even some visitors from neighboring communities, each person bringing a new layer of insight to the ongoing journey toward understanding. One day, as Marcus was setting up for an event at the community center, he noticed a group of teenagers hanging around, watching him curiously. They were a diverse group, laughing and joking, clearly comfortable with one another, though Marcus knew that just a year ago they'd hardly spoken. Smiling, he waved them over, inviting them to help with the setup. They eagerly joined, joking with him and asking questions about his time in the military, fascinated by his stories and grateful for his warmth and openness. Among them was Jake's son, a quiet kid named Ethan, who had often avoided Marcus before, embarrassed by his father's actions. Now, however, Ethan seemed at ease, as if his father's growth had given him permission to be himself without shame. As they worked together, Ethan surprised Marcus by speaking up. "Mr. Marcus," he began, his tone shy but sincere, "my dad told me a lot about what happened last year. He doesn't really talk about things like that, but he said he learned a lot from you. I just wanted to say thank you for giving him a chance, for giving all of us a chance." Marcus's heart warmed and he placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan, it took courage for your dad to come forward, to change," he replied, his voice filled with quiet pride. "And it takes courage to forgive, too. That's something we all have to learn." Ethan nodded, looking thoughtful as he absorbed the words, and then offered Marcus a small, grateful smile. It was a simple moment, but one that spoke to the deep and lasting change that had taken root in their community. Later that evening, as the event began, the room filled with laughter and conversation, people greeting each other like family. Marcus looked around, taking in the faces, old and young, all mingling, united by something stronger than fear or misunderstanding. Rachel and Layla stood nearby, beaming at him with pride, their presence a constant reminder of why he had started this journey. As he took the stage to open the event, Marcus paused for a moment, looking out at the crowd, his heart full. "Tonight," he began, his voice steady and filled with emotion, "we celebrate how far we've come, not just as individuals but as a community. We've faced hard truths, we've learned from one another, and we've grown together. This is our strength, our unity, our resilience. This is what makes us family." The crowd erupted in applause, the energy in the room radiating warmth and hope. And as Marcus stepped down, joining his family and friends, he knew that this was just the beginning. They had created something powerful, something that would endure, passed down to future generations. In the heart of their neighborhood, they had built not just a community, but a legacy of understanding, compassion, and respect. And in that moment, Marcus felt a peace deeper than anything he'd ever known, knowing that he had not only found his way home, but had helped make it a home for everyone else too. Months passed, and the community continued to flourish, the bonds forged in those difficult days only growing stronger. Marcus's gatherings had become a monthly tradition, a chance for people to come together, share stories, and address issues openly. The meetings evolved into workshops, mentorship programs, and even youth groups that focused on community service. What had started as a painful confrontation had now blossomed into something beautiful, a neighborhood united by mutual respect and understanding. One morning, as Marcus walked through the park on his way to the community center, he saw Officer Jake jogging along the path. They exchanged nods, their interactions now familiar and comfortable, a far cry from that tense first encounter. Jake stopped, catching his breath, and walked over with a hint of a smile. "Marcus," Jake began, his tone filled with gratitude, "I've been meaning to tell you something." He paused as if searching for the right words. "I'm transferring out of this precinct in a few weeks, not because I want to leave," he added quickly, "but because I think it's time for me to bring what I've learned here to other places. I want to help change things from the inside, just like you've done here." Marcus nodded, feeling a surge of respect for Jake's decision. "I think that's a powerful choice, Jake," he replied. "You have the chance to make a difference wherever you go. Don't underestimate that." Jake extended his hand and Marcus shook it firmly. "Thank you for everything," Jake said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You taught me to see people, not just situations, and that's a lesson I'll carry forward." As Jake continued his jog, Marcus watched him go, feeling a sense of closure. a quiet satisfaction in knowing that even the most unexpected people could change, could grow. It was a reminder that transformation was possible, that one small act could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he'd never imagined. That afternoon, Marcus returned home to find a letter in his mailbox, a letter from his former commanding officer, Captain Davis. He opened it, a smile forming as he read the handwritten note. Captain Davis wrote to commend Marcus for the impact he'd made, noting how proud he was to see one of his own soldiers fighting for peace in such a meaningful way. "You're a leader, Marcus, and a true hero, not just in the battlefield but in your own backyard," the letter concluded. Touched, Marcus folded the letter and placed it on his desk, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. It was as if his journey had come full circle, the support he'd received now reinforcing his commitment to keep going, to keep building and nurturing the community he loved. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began working with neighboring communities, sharing the model he'd created in his own neighborhood, helping others foster unity and understanding. He spoke at schools, community centers, and even police precincts, using his story to inspire others to look beyond their differences and work together for a common good. One evening, back in his neighborhood, the community threw a celebration in Marcus's honor, a surprise gathering that filled the park with laughter, music, and warmth. Families brought dishes to share, children ran around playing, and the air was filled with a feeling of joy and accomplishment. Marcus stood with Rachel and Layla by his side, feeling the love and respect radiating from everyone around him. As he looked out over the gathering, Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This community had given him purpose, had shown him that true strength was found not in isolation, but in unity. They had weathered storms together, grown together, and emerged stronger than ever. And as the sun set over the park, casting a golden glow over the faces of his friends, his family, and his neighbors, Marcus knew that they had built something lasting, a legacy of peace, resilience, and love that would endure for generations to come. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. He had found his home, and in doing so, he had helped others find theirs too. And as the evening faded into night, the warmth of their shared strength carried them forward, a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. As the years went by, the impact of Marcus's work spread far beyond the boundaries of his neighborhood. His efforts had become a movement, inspiring communities across the city to come together, bridging divides that once seemed insurmountable. People from all walks of life, from different races, backgrounds, and professions, took notice of the way his neighborhood had transformed, and they wanted to bring that same spirit of unity and resilience to their own lives. Marcus found himself speaking at events across the state, sharing the story that had started with a single, painful confrontation outside his home. At each event, he reminded people of the importance of seeing each other as individuals, of letting compassion and respect guide their actions. He met countless people who were eager to learn, to build bridges in their own communities, and each interaction left him feeling more connected to the purpose that had taken root in his heart that day in the driveway. One day, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a national conference on community reform. Leaders from around the country were gathering to discuss strategies for creating safer, more inclusive communities, and they wanted Marcus to share his experiences. Standing on that stage, in front of hundreds of people, he felt the weight of his journey, the challenges and triumphs that had brought him to this moment. He began his speech with the simple truth that had guided him all along. Our communities are our homes, and a home is only as strong as the love and respect we share within it. He spoke of the power of forgiveness, of the courage it took to confront prejudice, and the strength that came from standing together in the face of division. His words resonated deeply, and when he finished, the room erupted into applause, not just for him, but for the hope he had sparked in each listener. After the conference, people approached him, sharing their own stories of struggle and reconciliation, thanking him for inspiring them to take action in their own communities. Marcus realized that his work had grown into something far bigger than himself. It was a movement of compassion, a ripple effect that had reached into hearts and homes across the country. Back in his own neighborhood, things continued to thrive. The community center had become a lively hub of activity, hosting events, classes, and gatherings that brought people closer together. The youth programs Marcus had started were flourishing, with young people learning about leadership, empathy, and the importance of service. Many of the kids saw Marcus as a mentor, a role model who had shown them the power of resilience and kindness. One evening, as he walked home from the center, Layla, now a teenager, joined him, matching his stride as they walked side by side. She looked up at him with admiration, her eyes filled with pride. "Dad," she said quietly, "you've changed so many lives. I hope I can do something like that one day." Marcus smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. "You already are, Layla," he replied, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Every act of kindness, every time you stand up for someone or lend a helping hand, you're making a difference. It's the small things that create the biggest changes." They walked in silence for a moment, the street lights casting a soft glow over the neighborhood that had once been the scene of so much tension and fear. Now it felt like the safest place in the world, a true community built on understanding and respect. As they reached their doorstep, Marcus looked out over the street, feeling the weight of everything they'd built, the legacy of unity they'd created. And in that quiet moment, standing with his daughter by his side, Marcus knew that his journey had come full circle. He had turned pain into purpose, fear into strength, and in doing so, he had given his family, his community, and countless others the greatest gift of all, a place they could call home, a place they could feel proud of. And as he looked ahead, he knew that the seeds he'd planted would continue to grow, a testament to the power of resilience, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds of community. In the years that followed, Marcus's influence continued to grow, not only as a local hero, but as a national symbol of change. His neighborhood had become a model for others, frequently visited by leaders and community organizers eager to learn from the initiatives he had started. The once small gatherings at the community center were now well-known programs replicated in towns and cities across the country. Marcus had established a foundation, united together, dedicated to fostering community resilience, understanding, and inclusion nationwide. The foundation provided grants, training, and support for communities hoping to address social issues constructively and peacefully. It offered mentorship programs for young people, teaching them the values Marcus had lived by: respect, courage, empathy, and resilience. The foundation became a hub for social reform, bridging communities from different backgrounds and empowering them to create change in their own neighborhoods. Years later, on a warm summer evening, Marcus found himself standing in the very park where his neighbors had once gathered to support him after his confrontation with Officer Jake. Now, the park was hosting an anniversary celebration for the foundation, and people from all over the country had come to honor Marcus's legacy and the impact he had made. The event was bustling with activity, families laughing, children playing, and people sharing stories of how they had been inspired by Marcus's journey. Standing in the crowd, Marcus took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. He was no longer the young soldier who had come home seeking peace. He was a man who had built peace in ways he never could have anticipated. He thought of the countless lives touched, the people who had found understanding where there was once division, and the friendships that had grown from the seeds of forgiveness and change. As he looked around, he noticed a familiar face in the crowd, Officer Jake, now retired, standing beside his son Ethan, who had followed in Marcus's footsteps and joined the military. Jake approached Marcus with a warm smile, his face reflecting years of growth and healing. They shook hands, and without words, they both acknowledged the journey they had taken together, a journey of redemption, understanding, and transformation. Then Layla, now an adult and one of the foundation's directors, took the stage to address the crowd. Her voice was strong and clear, filled with conviction as she spoke about the importance of the work they were doing, carrying on her father's legacy. She shared stories of communities brought together, of young people empowered to lead, and of the future they were building, one filled with compassion, empathy, and strength. As the crowd listened, Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of pride. His daughter had inherited not only his passion, but also the values he had worked so hard to instill. She was the future, carrying forward the vision he had once held close to his heart. Layla finished her speech with a dedication to her father, thanking him for showing her, and everyone there, what it meant to truly build a home. The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus felt tears in his eyes as he embraced his daughter. Looking around at the people who had gathered to celebrate, he realized that the legacy he had built was not just his own. It belonged to everyone who had been part of the journey, everyone who had chosen to stand up, speak out, and make a difference. That evening, as the celebration continued under the stars, Marcus felt at peace. His work had transcended him, becoming a movement, a legacy that would live on long after him. He had built something greater than he had ever imagined, not just a community, but a foundation for change, a beacon of hope that would guide generations to come. And as he watched his family, friends, and neighbors laughing together, he knew that he had fulfilled his greatest mission. He had brought people together, shown them their strength, and created a lasting home for all of them. A home built on unity, resilience, and love. As the years continued to unfold, Marcus watched as the foundation he had built grew beyond anything he had ever dreamed. United Together had expanded to cities and towns across the nation, each community adapting its principles to address its own unique challenges. The Foundation's initiatives were helping bridge divides everywhere, transforming schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods, fostering understanding in places where it had once seemed impossible. One day, Marcus was asked to visit Washington, D.C., where he was to receive a national award honoring his lifetime of work in community building and social justice. It was a humbling moment for him, but it wasn't about the recognition. It was about the people he represented, the thousands of lives touched by the movement he had started. Rachel and Layla accompanied him, both of them beaming with pride. Layla, who had grown into a powerful voice for the Foundation, would introduce him on stage. At the ceremony, as he listened to Layla's heartfelt words about his journey, Marcus felt the gravity of the moment settle over him. She spoke of her father's resilience, of how he had turned his pain into a purpose that had transformed not only their family, but communities across the country. Her words were met with a standing ovation, and as Marcus took the stage, he looked out over the crowd, filled with leaders, activists, and ordinary people from all walks of life. He began his speech simply, with the same humility he had carried through his entire journey. "I started this work because I believed in the power of community," he said, his voice steady. "I believed that change doesn't come from a single person. It comes from all of us working together, refusing to give in to fear or hate." He spoke of the lessons he had learned along the way, about forgiveness, courage, and the power of listening. He shared the story of his first confrontation with Officer Jake, and how that single painful moment had sparked a movement, transforming both of their lives and, ultimately, the lives of so many others. His words resonated deeply, his message of unity and resilience echoing through the hall. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, but it wasn't the applause that touched him. It was the countless faces he saw, people who looked back at him with respect, hope, and gratitude. He realized then that his work had become something larger than even he had known. It was a beacon for others, a reminder that change was possible, and that a single spark could light a fire that reached far beyond one's own life. In the following days, Marcus returned to his neighborhood, feeling grounded and grateful. His life had been a journey he could never have predicted, but he was at peace with where it had led him. He still attended local meetings, still worked closely with his community, never forgetting where it all began. He knew that real change wasn't about grand awards or recognition. It was in the small, everyday acts of kindness and understanding that kept communities strong. Years later, when Marcus finally retired, he passed the leadership of United Together to Layla, who had grown into a capable and compassionate leader. She continued his legacy with the same love and determination, carrying forward his vision with her own unique voice and strength. Under her guidance, the Foundation continued to thrive, reaching even more communities, building bridges, and fostering unity. In his final years, Marcus became a beloved figure in his neighborhood, his presence a symbol of resilience and hope. People would come by to visit, seeking his wisdom, or just to sit and talk, knowing they were in the company of someone who had seen both the darkest and the brightest sides of human nature, and had chosen, again and again, to walk in light. One evening, as Marcus sat on his porch with Rachel by his side, watching the sunset over the neighborhood he had called home for so many years, he felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. The laughter of children playing in the street, the warmth of the evening air, the gentle hum of life unfolding around him. It was a peacefulness he had worked his entire life to create. He took Rachel's hand, and together they sat in silence, watching as the stars began to appear in the sky, a reminder of the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. His journey had come full circle, but his legacy would continue, carried forward by the people he had inspired, by the love he had shared, and by the communities he had helped to build. And in that quiet moment, Marcus knew he had lived a life of purpose, leaving behind a world that was a little brighter, a little kinder, and a little more united. In the twilight of his life, Marcus's legacy blossomed in ways even he had never envisioned. United Together had become an international movement, inspiring communities across the globe to prioritize understanding, empathy, and collective resilience. Layla, with her steadfast leadership and deep commitment, expanded the Foundation's work into new territories, bringing Marcus's vision to countries facing their own struggles with division and misunderstanding. Programs were launched in schools and neighborhoods worldwide, each one a testament to Marcus's unwavering belief in the power of community. In his neighborhood, Marcus's presence became something of a legend. Schools incorporated his story into their curriculums, and children often stopped by his house, eager to meet the man who had changed so many lives. He welcomed them warmly, sharing stories of his journey, reminding them of the importance of courage, compassion, and the power of standing up for what's right. He'd watch their faces light up with excitement and curiosity, and it filled him with pride to know that these children, too, would carry forward the values he had worked so hard to instill. One day, the city held a dedication ceremony in his honor, renaming the community center the Marcus Carter Center for Unity and Peace. The event drew people from all over, from former neighbors to distant supporters who had been touched by Marcus's work. Speeches were given, stories shared, and tears shed as people paid tribute to the man who had started it all. Standing before the crowd, Marcus took a moment to reflect. He spoke humbly, as always, acknowledging the community's role in their shared success. "None of this would have been possible without each of you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I only planted a seed, but you all made it grow. Every time you chose kindness over fear, every time you stood up for one another, you brought us here." The audience stood in applause, a sea of faces from different backgrounds, united by the impact of his journey. Layla, who had organized the event, stood nearby, her eyes brimming with pride. She knew her father's story by heart, yet she felt its power anew each time he spoke, reminded of the incredible legacy he had created. In his final days, Marcus spent his time surrounded by family and friends, his heart full, his spirit content. He would often sit on his porch watching life unfold in the community he had transformed, each moment a reminder of the beauty he had brought into the world. His life had been one of challenges, triumphs, and purpose, a journey that had left an indelible mark not only on his neighborhood, but on countless lives across the globe. And when Marcus eventually passed, his neighborhood gathered once more to honor him. People filled the streets, sharing stories of how he had touched their lives. Candles were lit, songs sung, and in the center of it all stood the Marcus Carter Center for Unity and Peace, a beacon of hope for generations to come. In the years that followed, his legacy only grew. Layla continued to lead United Together, her father's values guiding her with each decision. Children learned his story in school, his portrait hanging proudly in the community center, a reminder of a man who had turned one painful encounter into a lifetime of compassion, resilience, and unity. And so, Marcus's spirit lived on, woven into the very fabric of the community he had built. His legacy endured in every kind word, every act of understanding, and every connection that bridged divides. Marcus Carter had given the world more than a movement. He had given it a vision of what was possible when people chose to stand together, side by side, building a world rooted in love and respect. Years after Marcus's passing, the impact of his life's work continued to resonate, touching hearts and inspiring new generations. The Marcus Carter Center for Unity and Peace became a place of pilgrimage for people from all walks of life, a center of learning, dialogue, and connection. Each year, the foundation held a special day of remembrance on Marcus's birthday, inviting communities around the world to honor his legacy with acts of kindness and unity. Schools, community centers, and workplaces alike participated in activities aimed at fostering empathy and collaboration, symbolizing Marcus's enduring influence. Layla, now a respected leader in her own right, expanded her father's vision even further. She spearheaded new programs focused on youth leadership, aiming to teach young people not only how to navigate conflict, but also how to lead with compassion and inclusivity. Her father's teachings guided her, reminding her that real change began at the most personal level, in the simplest acts of kindness and understanding. One of Layla's initiatives was the One Heart program, where people were paired with others from different backgrounds to share meals, stories, and experiences. The program quickly grew in popularity, creating bonds that spanned cultures and generations. Each gathering echoed the values her father had lived by, and every shared meal, every open conversation, became a tribute to Marcus's belief that understanding could dissolve even the deepest divides. At the center itself, a beautiful mural of Marcus was created on one of the outer walls, showing him in his military uniform, a warm smile on his face, surrounded by symbols of peace, unity, and resilience. It became a place where people would leave notes, flowers, and messages of gratitude, a living testament to the countless lives he had touched. People visiting the center would often stop by the mural, taking a moment of quiet reflection, inspired by the legacy of a man who had changed the world by starting with his own neighborhood. Layla found herself constantly reminded of her father's influence, especially when she heard people share stories of how they'd been changed by his work. One story came from a young man named Javier, who had been a troubled teen in a nearby neighborhood. He explained that after attending one of the foundation's youth programs, he'd discovered a passion for helping others. Now, he was a community leader, working with underserved youth to help them find purpose and stay on a positive path. "Your father's story saved my life," Javier told Layla one day, his voice filled with emotion. "He showed me that one person really can make a difference, no matter where they come from or what they've been through." As Layla listened, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her father's legacy was alive and growing, sparking transformations in people just as it had for Javier. Her father's dream had transcended time, rooted in the simple but profound truth that every act of understanding, every gesture of compassion, was a step toward a more united world. On what would have been Marcus's 100th birthday, the foundation organized a global day of service in his honor. People across continents joined in, volunteering in their communities, holding dialogues and sharing stories of resilience and hope. The world, it seemed, had embraced Marcus's vision as its own, with individuals from all corners carrying forward his message of unity. That evening, as the sun set, people gathered at the Marcus Carter Center. Layla stood before the crowd, looking out over faces illuminated by candlelight, each flame a symbol of Marcus's enduring legacy. She shared a few words, her voice filled with the warmth of her father's memory. "My father taught us that every person has the power to make a difference, that even the smallest act of kindness can change the world," she said. "He believed that love and respect could build bridges, no matter how far apart we may seem. Tonight, we honor him by carrying his light forward, by making this world a place he would be proud of. The crowd held their candles high, their faces glowing with purpose, each person a part of the legacy Marcus had left behind. In that moment, his presence was felt as strongly as ever, a quiet but powerful reminder of the man who had believed so deeply in the strength of human connection. And as the night grew dark, the flames from those gathered candles continued to burn brightly, lighting the path forward, a path of unity, hope, and peace that Marcus had carved out for generations to follow. His spirit lived on, not just in memory, but in every act of kindness, every choice for compassion, and every community united by the strength of his enduring vision. As the years turned into decades, Marcus's legacy became woven into the fabric of communities worldwide. His teachings were passed down like cherished stories, a thread of wisdom that connected generations. The Marcus Carter Center for Unity and Peace had grown into an internationally renowned institute, a hub where people gathered from around the world to learn conflict resolution, compassion-based leadership, and community building. What had once been a modest center in a neighborhood park had evolved into a sprawling campus with facilities dedicated to education, mentorship, and intercultural exchange. One evening, during the annual Unity Summit hosted by the center, Layla, now elderly but as passionate as ever, took the stage to address the audience. Her hair had turned silver, and her face carried the lines of a life devoted to carrying forward her father's mission. The summit hall was filled with people from all walks of life. Activists, educators, young leaders, and community members, all gathered to celebrate the values Marcus had instilled. Looking over the audience, Layla felt the depth of her father's legacy like a pulse, alive in every eager face and hopeful heart in the room. She began with the story that had been shared countless times but never lost its impact. The story of her father's journey from that single painful encounter with Officer Jake to a lifetime of transformation and peace-building. My father believed that peace is not something we wait for. It's something we create every day, in every choice we make, she said, her voice strong and steady. He taught me that change begins in our own hearts, that each act of kindness, each moment of understanding, builds the world we wish to see. Layla shared stories of how the foundation had helped bridge divides in war-torn regions, worked with youth from diverse backgrounds, and provided support to communities in times of crisis. The center's influence had reached nations, empowering individuals to become ambassadors of peace and resilience, just as Marcus had once been. She reminded the audience that her father's dream had been simple yet profound, to create spaces where people saw each other's humanity, where differences were respected, and where community was built on love. After her speech, Layla invited Javier, the once troubled young man who had found his path through Marcus's work, to the stage. Now a respected leader and director of the Foundation's youth programs, Javier spoke about the transformation he had experienced, not only in himself, but in the countless young people he had mentored. Marcus Carter gave me a second chance, Javier said, his voice full of gratitude. He showed me that I mattered, that we all matter, and that no one is too far gone to make a difference. Today, I work with young people to help them see their potential, just as he helped me see mine. The room was silent, captivated by the journey of transformation that Marcus had ignited in others. Javier's story was just one of thousands, each a testament to Marcus's enduring impact. The summit concluded with a candlelight procession around the campus, a tradition that had started years ago. Each person held a candle, and as they walked through the peaceful grounds of the center, the light spread, illuminating the path just as Marcus's legacy had illuminated lives across the world. People exchanged quiet words, shared memories, and felt the strength of a community brought together by a single vision of unity and peace. As Layla watched the procession from a quiet corner, she felt a profound sense of completion. Her father's dream had not only been realized but had grown into something far beyond what he could have imagined. She knew that even when she was gone, the spirit of his work would live on, carried by those who had been touched by his vision. In that moment, Layla felt her father's presence as clearly as she had all those years ago. She knew he would be proud, not only of her but of everyone who had come together to carry his message forward. Marcus's journey had been one of courage, compassion, and resilience, and in the hands of those he had inspired, his legacy would continue to grow, lighting the way for generations yet to come. The flame he had kindled was now a beacon, shining brightly in the hearts of all who believed in the power of unity, the strength of community, and the limitless potential of love. And as the candles burned, their soft glow filled the night, a timeless reminder of Marcus Carter's enduring legacy, a legacy that would never fade. As time passed, Marcus's vision became a guiding light for communities worldwide, evolving into a legacy far greater than any one person. The Marcus Carter Center for Unity and Peace expanded its reach across continents, establishing satellite centers in regions that had faced their own histories of division and misunderstanding. The center became a universal symbol of hope, and people around the globe began celebrating Unity Day each year in Marcus's honor, dedicating it to acts of compassion and community service. On the first Unity Day after Layla's passing, Javier, now the global director of United Together, addressed a gathering at the main center. He stood before a vast crowd with thousands more watching virtually and spoke with a reverence that echoed the spirit of both Marcus and Layla. Today, we celebrate not just one man's vision but a collective dream, a belief that every community, no matter its history, can be healed and united, Javier began. Marcus taught us that unity begins with the courage to listen, the willingness to forgive, and the commitment to build a future together. His work was not just about the conflicts we see, but about the unseen threads of humanity that connect us all. The ceremony continued with testimonials from individuals and communities that had transformed under the influence of the center's programs. A woman from a small village in Eastern Europe shared how the local United Together chapter had helped her community recover from decades of mistrust between ethnic groups. A young man from South Africa described how the center's youth programs had empowered him to mediate conflicts and bring unity to his town. Each story painted a picture of Marcus's dream realized on a global scale. After the ceremony, a memorial garden was unveiled at the heart of the Marcus Carter Center. Designed to represent the interconnectedness of humanity, the garden featured pathways from every corner of the globe, converging at a fountain symbolizing peace. Surrounding the fountain were stones engraved with the names of communities that had been positively impacted by Marcus's work, a testament to the lives he had touched. As Javier led the first walk through the memorial garden, he reflected on how far the movement had come. It was a journey started by one man's resilience, carried forward by his family, and now upheld by a worldwide community. Each step taken by those walking through the garden symbolized the collective path they had all traveled, led by Marcus's belief in the power of unity. On that Unity Day, people from around the world shared messages, memories, and commitments on social media, each one a tribute to the legacy of Marcus Carter. From small villages to bustling cities, the world honored his vision, and it was clear that his dream had transcended borders, languages, and generations. As night fell, thousands of candles were lit around the fountain in the memorial garden, casting a warm, flickering light that danced in the evening breeze. Each flame represented a life touched, a heart changed, and a commitment renewed. The gathering was silent, but the unity was palpable, a living embodiment of everything Marcus had stood for. Javier looked around, moved by the profound sense of togetherness that filled the air. He knew that while Marcus and Layla were no longer physically present, their spirits lived on in each person who carried forth their message. The dream of a world united in empathy, compassion, and resilience had become a reality, and it would continue to grow, a legacy that knew no end. As the candles burned into the night, they became part of the stars above, eternal and unwavering. Marcus's legacy had become the light guiding countless people around the world, showing them that, no matter the obstacles, unity and peace were always within reach. And in that moment, it was clear. Marcus Carter's dream had truly become a gift to the world, a legacy that would forever inspire hope, compassion, and the endless pursuit of a better, brighter tomorrow. Decades later, Marcus Carter's legacy continued to ripple across the world, transcending the boundaries of any one place or people. The Marcus Carter Center for Unity and Peace had become an institution not only for learning and healing, but for connecting humanity. Students from all over the globe studied there, immersing themselves in programs that emphasized empathy, conflict resolution, and sustainable peace. Communities experiencing tension or hardship regularly reached out to the Center for Guidance, and the United Together network, now spanning almost every continent, had evolved into a vast web of people committed to Marcus's vision. Every Unity Day, the world paused to honor the values Marcus had championed. Cities lit up monuments in soft, warm lights, and gatherings unfolded in parks and town squares. People of all ages participated in acts of kindness, each one reminding them of Marcus's belief that every gesture, however small, was a powerful step toward unity. The Marcus Carter Center streamed live events, connecting communities from vastly different backgrounds in shared moments of reflection, storytelling, and song. It had become a day when millions felt connected, bound by a commitment to the ideals Marcus had stood for. The memorial garden at the center had become a global symbol of peace. Every path leading to the fountain represented the convergence of diverse cultures, traditions, and histories into a shared vision of compassion. People came from distant places to walk those paths, leaving small tokens and messages as symbols of their dedication to peace. The stones engraved with the names of communities Marcus had impacted had multiplied over the years, stretching out like a mosaic of unity across the garden. One Unity Day, a young girl named Amina, whose great-grandparents had once lived in Marcus's neighborhood, visited the memorial garden with her family. She had grown up hearing stories of Marcus and Layla, of the world they had helped build, and now stood before the fountain, feeling the weight of their legacy. Inspired, she leaned over and whispered a promise: to carry forward their work, to keep building bridges, and to be a voice for peace wherever she went. Amina's quiet vow echoed what so many felt, that Marcus's dream belonged to all of them now. His work, once a single spark in his neighborhood, had ignited a movement that spanned generations and cultures, bound by the belief that true strength lay in unity. As the sun set that evening, millions around the world held their candles high, their lights stretching across continents, a sea of flickering flames symbolizing the continuity of Marcus's vision. From the smallest villages to the most crowded cities, people felt his presence, a reminder that one person's courage, empathy, and resilience could indeed change the world. Marcus Carter had left behind more than just a legacy. He had left a roadmap for humanity. And as the candles glowed, connecting strangers in a shared dream of peace, his spirit lived on, a guiding light for all who dared to believe in the boundless power of love, unity, and understanding. His legacy was not bound by time. It was woven into the fabric of human connection, an eternal testament to the idea that together we are stronger, braver, and infinitely more compassionate. And as the night deepened, those who gathered in his memory felt the quiet, enduring presence of Marcus Carter, a reminder that even after the brightest lights fade, their warmth remains, inspiring hope in all who seek a better world. If this story inspired you, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one. Join us as we share more journeys that spark change and bring us closer together. Thank you for watching.